An American Werewolf in London, John Landis, 1981. Considered comedy horror or horror comedy. I heard I saw a clip of him saying in typical, to me, annoying John Landis style that it isn't a comedy. What do you think of this?
I don't think it is a comedy. I think it's a straight out horror film, and I think that's the problem with it is that it's not it doesn't have the tension needed to be a true horror film, and I think that Landis's sensibilities as a comedy director. I mean that's basically what he's known as: the Blues Brothers, Animal House, Kentucky Fried
Yeah,
Movie, Coming to America,
go
all of
into
that.
his filmography.
Yeah, I mean I mean Landis Landis is talented. I'm not going to say he's not talented. Landis is pound for pound one of my most not favorite, but one of my most entertaining filmmakers of the late '70s, early '80s. He would do some of the funniest shit. That Animal House still stands right now, as canceled as that film and every aspect of it would be today. It's still one of the funniest films ever made. The Blues Brothers, a weird marriage of comedy, music, a dedication to the music that as it was, because Aykroyd, Belushi, and Landis all had to fight to use those artists. Aretha, Cab Calloway, Ray Charles, John Lee Hooker, when the studio wanted when the studio wanted contemporary hits like Rolls Royce with Car Wash. Car Wash had just been out, so I I commend these guys. I commend Belushi, Aykroyd. I commend John Landis for really sticking to the guns and having a vision. They had a vision with comedy. You go into Twilight Zone, and if you he directed one segment. He directed the infamous Victor. What was the actor's name? Vic Morrow. Vic Morrow. The segment where Vic Morrow is a racist who he is a racist that finds himself going into the bodies of all of the people that he dislikes. So with Vic Morrow, you had the tragedy with Vic Morrow and two
Yeah, go
Vietnamese
into that. Tell us
children.
about that.
Well, yeah, it's a real troubling story because it kind of validates a weird reputation that Landis had, where he would argue, and a lot of people would come to his defense to say that it was a freak accident, and it was a mistake. It wasn't Landis's fault, but Vic Morrow and two children. I'm gonna get their names real quick. I have to. I can't remember their names, but Micah Dinley and Renee Shinyi Chen, to in a segment where Vic Morrow was, I think, a Viet Cong soldier, but it was Vic Morrow, and the rest of everybody in the film, in the story, sees him as this Viet Cong soldier. He is carrying two children, and a helicopter was flying too low to the ground, hit some power lines, some cables or something, and it came down and it decapitated him and the children. Now, that was a lawsuit that went on for almost a decade, where Landis was ultimately Landis was ultimately acquitted, and I don't think he wasn't held liable. I don't know exactly if they just ruled it an accident or if they, but there was a lot of weight that came down on Landis, and it severed and ruined his relationship with Spielberg, because Spielberg was an executive producer on that film, also a director on one of the segments. It was Joe Dante, Spielberg, Landis, and George Miller. So that's 1983. That effectively derailed John Landis's career, although he would go on to continue making studio films Into the Night with Jeff Goldblum, Michelle Pfeiffer. Um, his biggest hit, Coming to America with Eddie Murphy. But the reputation never truly recovered, and it was something that he dealt with even now. I mean, it's still something that gets brought up, and you could see that he's visibly annoyed by it. I can't blame him on that, but if he's guilty, he's guilty. Who knows? Who knows exactly what happened? And when you have money involved with that kind of situation, it's very problematic. Who's telling the truth and who's covering up? But he had a reputation of doing part of the problem is that he was a stuntman early in his career. He went to Yugoslavia to work on a Clint Eastwood film called Kelly's Heroes in the late '60s, which he was, I think, either around 17 or 19 at that point, and he got the idea. In '69, he got the original idea for An American Werewolf in London, wrote the script from there, and then it would take another decade before he was able to get the money together, find a company that would pay for it. And he didn't even find a company that paid for it. He got what was called a negative pickup. So it was basically a negative pickup is where you find a company that is willing to pay for the film after it's already been shot. Thus, the negative of the film, and that's how this particular film got made. He had made a film called Schlock. I think it was his directorial debut, or really low budget, really shitty Roger Corman-esque kind of thing. I don't know if it was through Corman, but it was about an ape. I'm not really sure, but on that film, a 21-year-old John Landis hired a 20-year-old Rick Baker to do the gorilla or the chimp outfit, the costume. And Landis, in typical Hollywood fashion, promised Rick Baker, we're going to work together again. I got this idea. He gave him American Werewolf in London, and it would take a decade before that would get filmed, before the money would come through for that. In the interim, Joe Dante's The Howling came up. Rick Baker took that. Landis gets the money for An American Werewolf in London, calls up Baker. Baker tells him he's already working on that. Landis guilts him into quitting that to come work on his film, but then he had to rewrite. Rick Baker would have to redesign everything because all of the designs that he had for An American Werewolf in London, he was using in The Howling. The Howling would ultimately be taken over by Rob Bottin, who would later go on to do The Thing with John Carpenter. So it's a convoluted Rashomon-esque kind of storytelling. But it was something that Landis never really forgave Rick Baker for. He held it against him for a long time. But Landis would come over, do An American Werewolf in London, and create one of probably the greatest single transformation scenes ever put on film. And as I watched it again last night, I realized this holds up for a reason. This is incredible in 2023. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for audiences watching it in 1981. Here's the problem with the film, and I don't know your take on the film. I don't know how many times you've seen it. I don't know what your relationship with this film is, but I had never seen the film from beginning to end until this weekend.
Okay.
The film itself, for me, doesn't hold up. There are a lot of problems, and I think it's because of the tone of the film, where it's not really a comedy, but it's not dark enough to be a horror film from the late 70s, early 80s. I think it could have went to a darker place. I like a lot of what Landis puts on the screen. I like the nurse. Jenny Agutter as Alex Price, the nurse. I like the doctor. I like that little pub. I like the way he shoots the Moors, and I love Griffin Dunn. I think Griffin Dunn is wonderful in this film, as he's slowly rotting away. The way it's so matter of fact in its presentation really gets to me. It makes me laugh. I think it's a fucking hilarious, wonderful aspect of the film, but I think the film suffers because it doesn't have the tone necessary. It doesn't have the tone that makes it live up to those transformation scenes. That's my personal opinion. And yet, I still enjoy this film. I still enjoy it. I like watching it. I think I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's really interesting, well made. I love Rick Baker's work. It's almost enough to make me overlook everything else. I like the music he chooses, but I don't like his use of the music in this film, which I think undercuts the Marcel's version of Blue Moon at the end of the movie. It comes too abrupt, and it it's like he doesn't trust his it seems like he doesn't trust the tension that he's trying to create. So he's trying to serve two masters. And although you, as you rightfully pointed out, that Landis considers this a straight horror film, I don't think it I don't think it fits into that because of the choices he makes. Now, that being said, I'm really interested in your relationship to the film and how it comes off to you, because I'm not I I would be surprised if you didn't I'd be surprised if you weren't amazed by the transformation. But I have a feeling you have a lot of problems with the rest of the film. I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if I'm wrong. I'm assuming.
I don't have problems with the film. I just think that the film has like you say, I think I think it's kind of talking. You say serving two masters. I say it's talking on both sides of its mouth.
Yeah.
Um, it's a tragedy. The film it's a tragic story,
Yeah.
and it has elements of like a classical tragic story. Like
Hmm.
the dead friend appears to the protagonist. That's Shakespearean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have a suicidal protagonist, a doomed love story. Um, but it's couched in comedy because John Landis is cutesy.
Yeah. That's a
Um,
very good description of it. He's cutesy, which means that he's not confident in the darker aspects of it. So you know, we've talked in the past about comedy and horror, comedy and fear, terror, living side by side, holding hands, walking through this world, and how often something that is frightening also makes you laugh. But this is cutesy. This is not funny, and the cuteness, the cutesy aspect of it, really takes away from anything that could possibly be frightening. That's my personal opinion on that. And like when I say it might be a problem, I don't mean exactly what you said and how you describe it is the problem I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a problem that keeps you up at night wondering what this movie could have been. I'm talking
of
about
course, yeah.
watching it and saying, you know, this is I got a problem with this movie. This movie doesn't we're talking semantics here. So it's my attitude
Well, I
is
mean, if you look at
yeah. Yeah.
his filmography is like, okay, comedy, and then it has like these pepperings of like horror or horror adjacent.
Yeah.
Um, you know, you have Animal House,
Yeah.
Blues Brothers, and you have this.
Hmm.
And then you have, you know, Trading Places,
Yes.
but then you have Twilight Zone,
Hmm.
which Twilight Zone, you know, it's you could say it's a horror adjacent, or it's, you know, it's not Trading Places.
No.
And then you have Thriller. I think Thriller is John Landis's.
Masterpiece.
That's his
What's
best.
that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, and that's more horror than this. Um, think,
I'm losing you right now. Go ahead.
can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I said I think Thriller is John Landis at his best,
Yeah.
and that it's more of a horror film than this, because although it has music and all that other stuff, and we've talked about Thriller.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the Baker transformation, but I want to talk about it more. But Thriller uses the language of horror that we all know. We've talked about this kind of like recently within the horror thing when we're talking about Suspiria. Like, is the grammar? What's the relationship of a certain piece within its genre, and so that people know the tropes, and how is it that at times like someone may be turned off because they see the thing coming, whereas someone else is excited because they see it coming, because they're like, I speak this language, I understand. It was a similar thing that we were talking about that for Suspiria, when we each had different reactions to it.
Yeah.
At the same time, we were talking about that for Body Snatchers, where I could be watching it with Leslie, and we each are using, like, interpreting a cut different ways. So it's obviously it's not as straightforward as you would think. But getting back to Thriller, this kind of hybrid. It's a music video, but it's horror, and it's Michael Jackson, and then Three Amigos, and Coming to America.
Yeah.
And then later he has Innocent Blood. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have it, but I haven't watched it yet. Have you seen that?
I've seen it. Yeah, it's been a long time, but I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's one of those like 80s, early 90s vampire comedies. And there's a bunch of those, and eventually we're gonna have to devote some time to that. But just that kind of corner of the horror genre, and especially the horror comedy thing. So if you look at John Landis's career, it's, to me, horror comedy. So that when he says, well, it's not a comedy, I'm like, yes, it is.
I think it's an unintentional comedy. I don't think he's leaning into comedy, but I think it's a comedy.
I think it's an unintentional,
Well, yeah.
oddly, I don't think it's an unintentional horror, but I think it's definitely one of the stepping stones of horror comedy in terms of the history of that subgenre or whatever. He's putting in the Jewish jokes, the Jewish humor, all that stuff. In that sense, it's like it's on this side of fucking Mel Brooks, and it's on that side of Woody Allen.
Yeah.
And you can also say that you describe Young Frankenstein as a dick joke. Well, this is a puberty dick joke.
Yeah.
Because very much like In the Company of Wolves, this is the pubescence, the transformation, what we talked about with that, growing hair. The interesting thing that I think, though, is that had it not been for the comedy aspects of it, I don't know that it would be considered. I think it is considered on a certain level a classic, or maybe a cult classic. But I think it's a comedy that kind of like makes it that. Obviously, had he not included the comedy, it would have been a different film. But would it have gone the way of The Howling, like you talked about? You mentioned The Howling.
Yeah.
The Howling is, it's one of these werewolf 80s movies, like Silver Bullet or Wolfen, or that kind of from that era. But people don't really remember or talk about those films as much as they talk about American Werewolf.
But
And
why
I
are
think
they?
it's the comedy.
Yeah,
It's the comedy that made it feel fresh and modern at the time and made it different.
that might be the case for many audiences, but it's the thing that detracts from me. And so for me,
Sure.
it's
I'm just talking about the
yeah.
overall. Um, I want to place it in. I want to place it on a couple different levels because I want to. We're going to talk about Rick Baker,
Mm-hmm.
and already I like the convolutedness of like, okay, this person was doing this and this person was doing that, but place for us in the going back to Abbott and Costello,
Mm-hmm.
and this is also a Universal film, right?
Yeah.
Um, through the Roger Corman world, or what that blood bucket or whatever buckets of blood or whatever it's called, get us here from the beginnings of as you see it horror comedy, and where does this fall in that lineage?
Well, I think this is an advancement. I mean, the Universal horror films had been a staple of genre filmmaking. They had been the thing that put Universal on the map. They had with the original monsters: Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy. Later on, the Invisible Man and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. These are the things that established Universal, and they were the ones that kept the money running in, kept the money coming in. The different iterations of Frankenstein, certainly, the Wolfman, leading into Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, which was a Frankenstein, Bela Lugosi returning as Dracula, and Lon Chaney Jr. returning as the Wolfman. This is these stories are what made Universal popular. And the problem is that they were lowbrow. They were in some cases you got to understand it was during the war. A lot of that time during a lot of that time, costs were being cut back because lumber was unavailable, nails were unavailable. So a lot of those sets were recycled. And if you look at Frankenstein versus House of Frankenstein or Ghost of Frankenstein or even Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, they're much cheaper looking films. The passion is still there, and in some cases, the performances. I mean, Lon Chaney Jr. never. I don't think Lon Chaney Jr. ever just showed up for a paycheck. His Larry Talbot is one of the great tragic heroes of cinema because he's not the creature. He's not Frankenstein's monster. He's not Bela Lugosi or John Carradine playing Count Dracula. He doesn't have that sense of evil in his danger. His danger is more tragic and sad because he's overwhelmed by something that he can't control. So um, I think both the fear of a mute Frankenstein, the evilness of Dracula, and the tragic hero that is Larry Talbot really covered a lot of the bases and made it possible for audiences to really embrace these characters. And then by the end of the Universal run, they were bringing them all together in specific films: House of Dracula, Ghost of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, that kind of shit, where Count Dracula, the mad scientist, trading the Wolfman's brain with the Frankenstein. It's all silly, but there's something about the characters that really work, that sell it. By the end, with Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, what you have is Universal. Universal was really trying to save itself because they had overspent on Olivier's Hamlet and a number of other films that didn't pan out for them. So making something cheap like these films that would have a huge return would would take care of the cost overruns of something like Olivier's Hamlet, which people weren't going to go to see on the same level of a Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So it's so weird because even when we were talking earlier in the last couple of weeks, I've told you horror is really a ghetto of genre filmmaking. It's cheap, it's seemingly easy, and it's obvious in a lot of respects. But when it's great, when it really taps into the psyche, and when it really goes to these dark places of the soul, you get great films like the first film in each of these series. Those three characters, the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster, and Count Dracula, they really they really do embody our personal fears of the world around us, but also who we are, who we are personally. So all of that comes into play. I think Landis, I think Landis hints towards that by casting David McNaughton in this film and Griffin Dunn. He's playing up the idea of two boys in over their heads, just looking to have a good time, backpacking across Europe, probably just out of college, and listen to their conversation. Their conversation is about some chick that Griffin Dunn wants to fuck, and how it's not going to happen. And then, even in death, that's what he goes back to. He goes back to that in that conversation. Um, there's something very quaint about the beginnings and the ideas that start this film out, and yet the film fails because it doesn't. I'm not even sure that the jokes are the problem. The problem is it's probably too brightly lit, and it's not. It's not stylistically dark enough. Does that make sense to you? That where
Yes. Yeah.
it's yeah. He doesn't trust in that where a joke should be. It's almost like I can hear him saying "waka waka" after every joke. He
Yeah.
punctuates it. He
Yeah.
hits it too
Right.
hard, and I think that's the problem. That's the problem with the film.
How do you get from Abbott and Costello to this film? Like, what's in between? Like, what's horror
Oh, okay.
comedy in
Well,
between?
what happens is good. Thank you for reminding. I was going off on tangents. I think what happened was,
Anything less would be
yeah, Universal wanted to get out
waka
of the
waka.
yeah, Universal wanted to get out of the monster game because it was too lowbrow. They wanted to build up their reputation as something a little bit more artsy and a little bit more respectable. These are not respectable films. These are kid films in some sense. These are scary films that are not considered art. So they wanted to move away from that, but also the everything is trends. So in the same way that we heard in horror noir, black cinema, or black horror cinema, you had the gradual abandonment of the traditional Hollywood monsters moving into the sci-fi. So you would have, and there were a couple of instances of science fiction attempts at melding a Wolfman story with a science fiction or a Dracula with a science fiction. It was really low budget shit that doesn't. When you try to force characters together, sometimes it works, but a lot of times it's just fucking embarrassing. And so the culture had basically grown tired of this. They'd grown tired of the universal monsters, and they were veering towards science fiction. Now, at the same time, when you take a decade long break, what ends up happening is other cultures begin adopting and reinterpreting those stories. So you had the Hammer films, And I'm not a big I can't say I'm not a big fan of the Hammer films because I've never seen them. I don't know the films. I've never really sat down. I mean, I love Christopher Lee. I love Peter Cushing. I love Oliver Reed, but I've never seen these films. But with the success of the Hammer films, English made, which, let's be honest, it fits more. You know, all of the Universal films are set in European countries, Transylvania, Romania, Bavaria, parts of Germany, like that. But
London. Yeah.
London. Once Hammer gets a hold of it, now you have Christopher Lee, you have Peter Cushing, you have Oliver Reed, and you have a darker, sexier, bloodier take on the genre because these are in color now. But with color comes a lack of the black and white cinematography that adds both the dreamlike quality as well as the shadows that are no longer available in the Hammer films. From that point, you have the desire to see these creatures again. And Landis, and I understand what you say about Landis. He can be a little bit annoying, but I don't find him annoying. I like listening to Landis. I find him a little bit infectious. I think I'm buoyed a little bit by the excitement that he has for making movies. He doesn't bother me like certain directors that we've talked about numerous times in the past.
Mhm.
I'm not saying Beetlejuice. I'm not saying it. I'm not gonna fucking say it. You can say it, but I won't. He 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 had this wonderful idea, and I think that what he achieves in this movie is half brilliant, half masterpiece, and half disappointment because he's not secure in himself enough as a filmmaker to trust the horror. And it's a real problem with him as a director because Landis considers this his favorite film of his. And I'm like, wow, he doesn't see what I see. It's as if the power of the transformation scene is so great, and it is. It's one of the greatest things ever captured on film. It's one of the greatest, not captured. It's one of the greatest things ever manufactured for film. It is a brilliant scene that holds up 40 years later.
I have a question
Yeah.
about that, but okay, so you got us into about the 60s.
hmm
Continue, please.
So so what happens is I think with the success of the Christopher Lee's Frankenstein, particularly his Dracula, and Oliver Reed's performance as the Wolfman, I think you know it's like anything. It's you take it with you take it with music. The blues was practically dead in the 1960s, and then the Rolling Stones and the Beatles start covering these classic tunes, both blues and early rock and roll. And now these guys are given a resurgence in life, and you see guys like Mississippi Fred McDowell and Mississippi John Hurt headlining Newport. You see, not headlining, but playing Newport, and
Yeah,
you know, you see a resurgence. It's a lot of times where America needs to be kicked in the ass and shown some of the brilliance that it has developed in order to get people aware of what of our history and going back to it. So that's basically what happened. The you know the U.S. developed these stories based on, of course, English authors: Bram Stoker, Mary Wollstonecraft, Shelley. The Wolfman is more of a cultural creation. Every culture has shapeshifters. Every culture has, you know, some animal that is dangerous in their whether it's tigers in India, wolves in America and England, bears. Native American stories of different tribes tell of shape shifting human beings who can use that power. And it's very strange that in England, during, I guess, roughly the same period as the Salem witch trials, maybe before, maybe even after, and it doesn't get heard about a lot. A lot of people, a lot of men were murdered by governments who were saying, "You're a wolf. We're going to skin you and see your furry body underneath all of that." This
Well,
was
yeah,
shit that was actually done, because there was a
we
belief.
I don't know on what level, but we talked about, and I think it was for the Wolfman episode that
Hmm.
you had said that it was episode 351
Yeah,
in the archives. Go back, Libsyn or Apple, depending on how far the Apple. I think it goes 100 episodes.
yeah,
Um, this idea of the effects of the moon, the lunatic.
hmm,
The lunatic is one who's affected by the moon, Luna. Um, this idea of like wild. This goes into the Angela Carter and the Company of Wolves. For the woman, it's like, is she a witch? Uh, is she hysterical? Because hysteria is etymologically connected to the womb
yeah.
as a word. Um, uh, for the male, it's this. It's you're a werewolf. These these urges. So okay, so then now you have the werewolf as this cultural archetype or cultural symbol. The United States is now receiving this stuff from Universal or and now rechanneled through Hammer and continue.
Well, I mean, that's basically it. That's basically what gets us to, Hollywood is all about what can make a profit. It's all about that. And the fact that John Landis had success, two major successes, one with Animal House, which was low budget, with an incredible return, and the Blues Brothers, which went way over budget. I think that film at least doubled, maybe 2.5 times its original budget. Out of control, ridiculous, and yet turned an incredible profit that year. And then you have this film where he did it for he did it kind of on the cheap. This film wasn't that expensive to produce. He went to London. Um, London has a history in the streets. It has that architecture. It has that feeling to it. When you go to shoot in that village, that those places exist. It's kind of crazy how a good director will be able to take advantage of the disadvantages that they have as a filmmaker. And I think Landis was able to do that. So you have this sense that people are ready for this kind of story. It's been enough time for them to forget about how great it was, but it's also it's forgetting the stories that we grew up with, because a lot of these films in the fort, Frankenstein was what, 33, Dracula was 31, the Wolfman was maybe 40 or something like that. A lot of these films had been sold off to TV, so you would have kids 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old watching this shit on TV in these matinees, and you remember uh, whatever UHF station had a Saturday or Sunday morning matinee. We had it, World Beyond Action Theater on KPHO Channel 5 out here. I'm sure you had that on in LA. And then the fact of Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. So there was this burgeoning desire to there was this desire for nostalgia, but also a need to revamp things. It always goes back to the same thing. Yes, we've done this before. Let's do it again. Let's see what else. There's still milk in this cow, and that's
Yeah,
basically what it is. It's always going to be like that. People talk about reboots and remakes, and although I don't think it's ever been as heavily. I don't think it's been as heavy as it is today at the expense of other things. This is not a new story. I mean, Jesus Christ, there's about 5 or 6 original Frankenstein films. The Wolfman, 5 or 6. Dracula, 4 or 5. The Mummy, the Mummy's Tomb, the Mummy's Curse, Curse of the Mummy, Hand of the Mummy. Um, you can keep going back to these stories because, well, shit. How do you kill the undead? You kill them for that
Yeah.
movie, and then they come back. You can always bring somebody back to
Yeah,
life.
they
You can,
don't die.
yeah, they don't die. They multiply. It's just
Yeah.
you just keep doing this shit, and part of you was like, when is Larry Talbot going to be able to rest? Because
Never.
never. Because at the end of, I'm not sure if it's Frankenstein. No, it's not House of Frankenstein, I think, or Ghost of Frankenstein. Larry Talbot walks into the garden, looks up at the moon, and he doesn't transform. And there's a part of you that's like, good. I'm glad he has peace. It's a fucking movie. It's a fictional story, and it's a fiction character. But if the movie is done well and the character is endearing enough, you want them to find some semblance of ease, of safety, of being of rest. So there is a part of there is that aspect of it. Um, with Landis's film, I get the feeling that Landis is a student. Landis is a great student of films. He knows movies. He's
They
always been.
mention them in the film. There's references to older
Yeah,
films.
there's
Um,
because
I mean, look,
that says something about the power of these characters, and not the book characters. We're not going back to Count Dracula from Bram Stoker's version or Frankenstein's creation from Mary Wollstonecraft. We're talking about the universal. We're talking about Karloff, Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr.
yeah.
They all mention their names specifically, and that says a lot about the power of cinema. That says a lot about who we are and how important all of this is to our lives. Yeah.
I mean, Werewolf of London.
Hmm.
If you just look at the names. A Universal picture called Werewolf of London.
Hmm.
A Vincente Minnelli, Gene Kelly film, An American in Paris. Put them in a blender.
Yeah.
An American in Paris plus Werewolf of London, a comedy and a horror, Universal horror,
Yeah.
and you get An American Werewolf in London. Um, the not only werewolf films, but like again, 1981. Look at the films that came out that year: Wolf and uh,
Yeah.
The Howling, um, but also Evil Dead.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like the 80s. People were ready for horror, but they're also ready for a certain kind of like comedy that's different from 70s comedy.
Yeah.
Um, and this is more. There's a little bit of a cynicism to it. There's a wisecrackiness to it that's different than the kind of 70s vibe of a Camaro or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or it's different. Um, Now, okay, get us, because this is at a crossroads between this horror thing, but also in terms of the makeup. And we've talked about this in the past. I think we did an episode in 2017. It was called Halloween and Horror, or that was kind of like the subject matter. Episode 148. Go back and find it. Get us now from the old Universal werewolf makeup get us now to this? What's the development? And you did talk about this. You have talked about it before, but for new listeners and people who don't remember, and me, because I don't remember exactly, but how did we get to that fucking transformation? And we've never really gotten anything as good since.
Yeah. Well, it was sadly CGI took over in the interim. So you got to remember 81. 81 is when Rick Baker was hired to do this film. Rick Baker, 20, he was 30 years old when he made this film. 31 maybe. Um, and then you have basically what it is, the advancements of animatronics in filmmaking. You have the emergence of Jim Henson and the Muppets. You have you have you have advancements in just the makeup itself, the tools needed. Jack Pierce, when he was developing the makeup for Frankenstein and the Wolfman, he was just dealing with plaster and face paints and costuming, and what he did was brilliant. It was brilliant on a whole other level. And in the Wolfman, the transformations are great, but it's stop motion. It's shoot Lon Chaney in bed. And it's interesting because the first film, I always thought it was we were watching Lon Chaney change from the face up. You don't see Lon Chaney's face change in the first film. That doesn't come till like the second or the third film. The first film is a slow application of makeup to his feet. The hair starts growing on his feet and it dissolves into new shots of that. And then the feet start growing larger. Then they put the claws on. But that was all slow. That was a film. That was a photography trick. This is something completely different. This is Rick Baker saying, well, I don't know how the fuck I'm going to do this, so we're just going to... One of the brilliant things of it is that Rick Baker was so young and so dumb that he didn't know that you couldn't do this. Which is really how many of the great advancements in film and technology come to us. Some creator with an idea of an end game not having enough sense to know it can't be done. So what, like with the hair, how do you get that hair to grow out of his body? Well, they put hair on a piece of latex or whatever. They string it through from underneath, and then they pull it back into the body of it.
And they just play it backwards?
And they play it backwards. But it looks
so
natural.
It rolls out.
It looks real. Yeah. So it looks...
That's crazy.
That is crazy. And then you have the whole... There's a point where David McNaughton is on the ground on all fours and the legs are extending out. His hands are... And one of the brilliant things about what Landis did in this film is that he made it an incredibly painful transformation. The transformations up to this point had not been painful. But Landis reasoned, and rightfully so, that if a man were to turn into an animal, you would be dealing with broken bones and stretched muscles, and that's going to hurt. And you're going to feel the pain of that the entire time. So McNaughton really sells it. He really, like, getting on the ground and falling and screaming and the tears coming out of his eyes. And when he's looking at his own hand, seeing it grow out of that, man, that kicks the shit out of you as you're watching it. I feel the pain. I feel the pain watching it. And then Landis flips him over. So now he's on his back. The legs are up. Well, you know why he did that, right?
No.
Okay. So at that point, they took they were shooting in in Alex Price's apartment. Now that apartment changes to a set. The floor is elevated about 3 or 4 feet off the original of whatever the ground is. So David McNaughton is placed on a bed underneath the floor with his head sticking out, and they build that body around him. And then he's acting with the screams, the head moving, the open mouth, the crying. But the rest of the body is built around him and is a puppet and is being maneuvered by 6 or 7 different puppeteers. And, you know, there were two really creative, innovative things that they did. Number one, Landis made it painful. And number two, he shot it brightly lit. If he had shot it in the dark, you would have been able to cheat the entire thing. And it's one of the few times where brightly lit works better for this, because there is no doubt that you're seeing what you're seeing. And with suspension of disbelief, you make that leap. You make that leap from a film watcher's psychological perspective. This is really happening. Because when I watched it, I was like, God damn, that's incredible.
Yeah, it looks and feels painful.
It does. There's nothing
it's like
else
you
like
feel
it.
it.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's one of the greatest. It really is one of the greatest achievements in all of cinema. And it was so great, and nothing had been seen like it, that it basically made Rick Baker's career. They created an Oscar. There had never been a makeup Oscar given before this film. There were honorary Oscars given to, I think, a couple of different makeup artists, but there was never a best makeup in a film. And this film, they made the category for this film. There was no question who was going to get it. There was no question who had. He advanced cinema in that one scene. And it's crazy because everything was spent on making that scene possible, so that when he transforms again in the movie theater, you don't really need to see it. You saw it. You see it happening with his hand again, and the next thing you know, they cut out, and boom, you come back and he's the wolf. You don't need to see it again. It's brilliant. That is what the film works on that level. The film works on this level of creating imagery in your head that you can continue to go back to. And it's the scene that everybody has seen. If anybody knows about this film, they've seen that segment.
That clip.
Yeah. Which is to its detriment, because the rest of the film, for me at least, was a letdown, because nothing in the rest of that film could live up to how powerful that transformation was. That transformation is one of the greatest things I've ever seen on film. And Rick Baker is incredible. Rick Baker deserves all of the accolades he has received over a 40-some-odd year career.
Well, yeah. Because, so the Oliver Reed film, the transformation is more in the old style?
I don't know. I've never seen it. Or was it like... I've never seen it.
Okay, you don't even know the transformation. Okay.
No.
Because what I'm wondering is, like, is it that you get, with the makeup, you get, like, this gradual... I mean, obviously, you would think that that's... you would assume that that's what it would be, is that, like, as films come out, but I don't know what the kind of survey in terms of werewolf transformations is over time, but between the old Universal and this early 80s version, you have in the, I think it's early 60s, Oliver Reed transforming into a werewolf. So I imagine that's it's probably going to be a middle ground, but at the same time, does it feel like by the time we get to this film, it's just exponentially that much crazier? You know what I mean? Like, what I'm trying to say is like, from stage one, Universal, to stage two, Oliver Reed, to stage three being American Werewolf. Is stage two in the middle, or is stage two closer to stage one? And then all of a sudden, by the time you get to Rick Baker, it's just a whole other fucking game.
I would assume it's a whole other game with Rick Baker because, number one, English films wouldn't have the budget that an American film would have. I mean, I think Curse of the Werewolf is only less than a decade before this film. Curse of the Werewolf is what, early 70s? Or is it late 60s? I'm not sure.
I think it's at the latest, probably mid 60s.
Is it? Well, I mean,
I don't know. Let's look it up.
1961. Okay, The Curse of the Werewolf was 1961. So you're talking 20 years earlier. So yeah. If I had to guess without having seen the film, without seeing the transformation, I would guess that it's more in keeping with the original Jack Pierce makeup, the original Universal film from the 40s.
So we have to, like, everyone at home, like, or wherever the fuck you are, like, there hasn't been anything like this.
No.
Ever.
And really,
I mean, what's the craziest movie makeup stuff going on before that? Alien? I don't know.
No, well, Alien is a man in a suit. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
But Alien has that moment of John Hurt's chest exploding.
Right.
Which, God, I would love to have been in the theater watching that shit when it first happened. In the same way that I would have loved to have been in the theater watching this as it happened. And that's another thing is like I think part of the problem that I have with this film is that I think this is a film that definitely needs to be seen with an audience. I think it would change the mood of the film. I think it would change the whole intake. I would look at it differently. I think that I'm missing out, and you know me, we've talked about this in the past. I don't like watching movies in theaters anymore. I don't like people. I don't like the movie watching, audience watching experience. They annoy me. They fucking piss me off. But I think this is a film where it would. I think this is a film where it would benefit. I really do think that to not watch this film in a theater and hear the oohs and the ahs and, you know, your woman reaching over and grabbing your arm and putting her head in your against your chest, I think you're missing something. This is one of the rare cases of that.
A few months ago, I don't know what we were talking about, but I ended up telling you about this film. Mm-hmm. We were recording for whatever else, and that weekend, I'll tell the story again. Leslie and I were sitting in front of the thing, and it's like, okay, what are we gonna watch? And then that typically takes an hour, mm-hmm. Where we're deciding what we're gonna fucking watch, or you know, me just like looking through all this shit on whatever service and blah blah platform. And she's like, well, I have to do a little bit of work, so I'm not going to really pay attention to it. And I was like, all right, cool. So she's on the laptop, and I said, all right, well, I'm going to put this on. Have you seen this? No, I haven't seen it. But again, I'm not going to pay attention after work. Okay, or whatever. So I'm watching it, and the experience was better for me having watched it with her, even though supposedly she wasn't going to watch it. The laptop, like, eventually went to the side, and she's like, what the fuck? Because, once you get to the transformation, first of all, it's what the fuck with the ghost of the friend who's all mutilated, and mm-hmm. and the transitions. He has about 3 appearances. One is like fresh, One is now in a state of like decomposition, and one is in a state of more advanced decomposition. Jack. Um, then when you get to the transformation, she's like, "What the fuck? Why are you making me watch this? Because I can't do my work right now." And it's like, I'm not making you watch shit. Like, I'm just watching this. But John Landis is making you watch it. Then by the time you get to the Piccadilly Circus, the full-blown werewolf is like on a rampage, and fucking someone's head gets fucking taken off.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
And she's like, "What the fuck?" Because to see things that are that still fresh in a reaction from someone, it's very rare. And so that made the experience better for me because it was like it had a freshness to it. It had there was an actual response outside of me that I was feeding off of, and that's what you're talking about, and that's what we'll go back to this over and over and over. The time when you and I went to go see Fight Club.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that.
We went to go see Fight Club. This is years after when it first came out. And there's a dad with a kid sitting like kind of like next to us, and in the big fucking reveal for Fight Club, the kid lets out some kind of exclamation, whatever he says, and it was so fresh, and it was so like, fuck, there's somebody who exists. There's still virgins in this world. There are still people who haven't tasted fill in the blank. There's still things that have not been seen by everyone. There's still someone that's still going to have their first kiss somewhere in the world. And like, that is very rare. And it gives you nostalgia, it gives you all these things. And horror is such a genre built on nostalgia. And the Danish have this concept, hygge, which at its most basic is like coziness, comfort, kind of like being wrapped in something comfortable, having like a hot chocolate with a candle on or something like that type of thing.
Yeah.
It's deeper than that, but I think more so than it's not only limited to being afraid. I think horror has a coziness to it for people who appreciate the genre, whether that's in film or literature or whatever. Scary stories when you're at around a campfire. Urban legends. There's something creepy about it, but at the same time, it's something like when you lean in close to someone and it's a form of gossip almost. Gossip about things that we don't know. Gossip is often about things we don't know, but it's about things that we think we know. There's something to that. And so John Landis's career is a mixed bag, I think. And I think this film is a mixed bag.
Yeah.
But it does bring those elements of nostalgia and horrible coziness. So for that, I'm always happy to see it. It's not my favorite horror film. Thriller, I watch every year, like multiple, like during this Halloween season, which begins always too late for me, in September, when it should be year round. But I watch Thriller like several times and I never get sick of it. I don't know that I'll ever get sick of this film. I don't watch it that often, but I've seen it multiple times. It's there in the consciousness. sometimes it feels a little dated, but at the same time, I can see how it would be fresh for its time. Um, John Landis is annoying, um, but it's an interesting piece.
I think when it gets right, it's one of the few films that can overcome its flaws because what is right is incredible. Um, I like the relationship between the nurse. I love Griffin Dunn's performance. So matter of fact and happy and cheerful, even in death. But there's something about that really works. But I don't think it's right for the film. You know what I mean? Where it's like I like I like honey, but I don't like it in my tea. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So it's like
okay.
I like his take on that character, and I like the way it performs in the film, but I don't think it's right for the film. And I think that's a direct at the end of the day. Ultimately, that is a directorial misstep on Landis's part.
Well, for if I'm gonna take like uh an arrow from your fucking quill or whatever, from your what is that what is that pouch where the arrows go?
The quill,
Um,
isn't it?
I think so. Um,
Yeah.
but if I'm gonna do that, um, I would say that by incorporating the comedy um, to such a degree, by the time that the character dies, it minimizes the amount of pain that you feel for the character.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Um, because um, the
The
quiver,
quiver, yeah.
um, the quill is the pen. But anyway, so then the you 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 lose kind of the stakes because it's all kind of just funny. Um, and you feel for the love interest, you feel for her character, and probably if anything, you also feel for the doctor who's been trying to like get to the bottom of this because he didn't have to do any of that shit. He didn't have to go way the fuck over there to Northern England to go figure out
Yeah.
to go and to get the cold shoulder from the villagers, you know.
To get the
Um,
hi hat. Yeah.
yeah. So it's if for someone especially like you who really wants that pathos, you want that emotional investment
Hmm.
in the film, um, I can see that it's a letdown because it's kind of like, okay, yeah, he's dead now, and then the movie is over, and then you have this um, pop cultural song playing with it, um, and it's kind of like, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So whereas something which is a pop cultural song, Thriller, um, you go through all of this stuff, you really feel the stakes of this, the the girlfriend, the love interest there, and then by the time you get to the very ending, the tension has all been released, and so it's like, ah, fuck, okay. And I think this is John Landis's like, and he touches on that in this film, and he does it really well because those are my favorite parts. But in Thriller, okay, it was okay, things are better, and then the fucking Michael Jackson looking at the camera, the eyes light up, the fucking the laugh, um, Vincent Price's fucking magical laugh, and you're just like, oh fuck. Um, that's why I think the dream sequences are the strongest for this
Hmm.
because it's like to include how he wakes up. Oh shit! When he wakes up from the dream, and that felt very real. And look, I don't. Again, I don't think that film should be limited to realism. But the dream sequences with even the Nazi kind of like imagery or whatever, and he wakes up from the dream, the nurse goes to the window, opens up the blinds, then she's killed. And it's like dream within a dream. So it makes you question, is any of this fucking real? Even when the orderly comes and opens up the blinds and then nothing happens. You're expecting, like, oh fuck. That's kind of like John Landis at his strongest, is when you're questioning reality. And that's, I think, the closest that the audience is going to feel to the main character's questioning of his own reality. The other times is more of this Woody Allen, we're talking about how neurotic we are, moment when he's with Jack. So it's an interesting mix. It's not necessarily even, which that could hinder it for some people.
Well, I mean, yeah, I sometimes it's I don't know, sometimes a film works for you and you're not exactly sure what works in a film and what doesn't. You know what you like. You know when it feels good. You know when you walk out of it. And, I mean, there are moments...
And those are different from something being a great film.
Yeah. But this is the thing. This is a good film, but it misses the mark on, I think, what it wants to do. So it's not a complete success. It's a film that I like, that I don't... Okay, so this is the best way that I can say it. It's a good film. It's a good time. But I think artistically it misses the target because of Landis's insecurities as a director. That's the best way I can say it. You know,
I avoid success and all that shit because it's kind of like, well, this is the film that he wanted. He was satisfied with what he put out. That's what he wanted to put out. So, and I think that's also the difference between. I don't think Siskel and Ebert or Pauline Kael or any of these like film reviewers, I don't think that that's enough in terms of like a form to address a film. I think a podcast is, I think, better than a Siskel and Ebert clip of a movie, because at the end of the day with Siskel and Ebert what you're going to get is, I liked this movie because of this. I didn't like this movie because of that. You should see this movie because of this. You shouldn't see this movie because of that. And I'm going to give it some kind of weird arbitrary rating according to whatever the format is, stars, thumbs up, whatever the fuck. Without any kind of like analysis of where does it fall in. That's why I'm big on timelines. I'm big on like the culture around it. Like the stuff that we talk about is more than just, we do talk about how we react to a film, but it's more than that. And so to even discuss it in terms of something being a success or a failure, it's like, well, at that point it's kind of arbitrary, because it has to be from film to film. Are you even using the same fucking so-called like grading format or criteria that you used for this previous one? Probably not. It changes. And that being said, I do think it's a mixed bag, but this ultimately I think is watch this with RickRamos. I don't think it's don't watch this with RickRamos. So even if we don't, even if we disagree on a film, or if we don't think that for me, it's like I want a vision, I want an aesthetic, I want some kind of I want the personality of the director somehow in the film. I want something there. And if none of that stuff is there, I can still I can still try to understand that film and try to understand what it's talking about, etc. If a filmmaker is happy with the film that they put out, then obviously it's like, well, to them, that's a success. If you're talking about box office, or one is talking about box office and it doesn't do well, then okay, well, it's a box office so-called failure, whatever. These are very arbitrary and subjective ways of looking at films. But either way, the point is for us to discuss in a deeper way than oh, you guys should really see this movie because it's so fucking amazing, or yeah, don't watch it, it sucks.
Yeah. Well, it's
you know what I mean?
I've never told
we're here to do more than that.
I've never told anybody not to watch a movie because I thought it sucked. I said I thought it sucked. It didn't work for me. There was a problem here, but I am also willing to take a stand and say this is a failing, or this is when you say, does the film represent the attitude of the filmmaker? I think this film represents John Landis's attitude brilliantly. And yet I still think it's problematic.
And and on the flip side of that, I don't think the film is as annoying as he is, even though I do think it does represent his attitude and his kind of like tone. Yeah. I do think it's a mixed bag film though, and I can see the reasons why you would say that, especially if you want those. If you're looking at stakes, if you're looking at the emotional like investment that you're going to put into a character, it's undercut by the humor.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't allow you to like relieve enough tension, but still feel like fuck. You know, your friend's going through some shit. Maybe you're gonna. The other day, Leslie was. She had heard some bad news, and so she said something, and then I grammatically corrected her, and then she looked at me with a look that could kill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, I just wanted to make you laugh, and then it, on some level, it was a diffusion of tension, but underneath was still what she was feeling in terms of the bad news that she had heard. But it was enough of a distraction and a substitution for another emotion that was after like consciously referred to kind of like, all right, well, at least it changed something a little bit, and it gave a little bit of something else for the time being. This doesn't do that. This is John Landis's cutesiness wrapped around a horror film.
I think that's a pretty good assessment. It sums it up. Watch the movie, see it for yourself, and tell us what you think. Hey, it's only an hour and 37 minutes. It's a good time to spend.
Yeah, or don't tell us anything. Just give us money.
Always give us money. Come on, goddammit. Go down to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. Buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. We got people donating out of the good of their heart, and we appreciate it. But just keep it coming in as best you can, because we are out here busting ass every fucking week trying to put this show together for passion. And passion doesn't pay. So we want to thank the people that have contributed so far, and look forward to those of you who haven't contributing, and those of you who want to keep us going. So thank you very much. That's our episode. Next week we'll be back with another episode going into Halloween. Bye bye now.